Hello and welcome. This week is Carers Week, which gives us a great excuse to celebrate all the wonderful people who are looking after someone right now. 1 in 9 adults in Kent are believed to care for someone, and Jenny, who has joined us today, is one of them. Welcome, Jenny.
Hello.
Would you be able to tell us a bit about your caring responsibilities?
I've been a carer for my husband for 20 years now. Um, I suppose, like most carers, it started off with just doing simple things and then that built up. So my caring responsibilities now are getting him out of bed, getting him dressed, helping him wash, sorting out all of his medication, making appointments, doing the paperwork, making sure meals are cooked, drinks are done. And before you realise it, you are the person that person completely relies on during the day. And you don't actually realise that you are a carer until someone points that out. On top of that, my son's autistic. So
Right.
I went from a mum to a carer, and my daughter in her teens had a very rare autoimmune condition. So I was a carer for her as well. And my mother in law has complex needs. So while I'm not a full time carer for her, there are issues where I have to help with her healthcare as well. So a carer has different roles. And yeah, so those are my caring responsibilities.
What has the last year and a bit throughout COVID been like? What's it been? It must have been really, really hard for you. What's it actually been like?
COVID has been, as for a lot of carers, really, really tricky. Um, First of all, getting access to healthcare was immediately hard. All hospital appointments were cancelled,
Yeah.
and I think that was the immediate effect. All of a sudden, everything was cancelled or delayed or changed. Um, the inability to immediately accompany those we care for to appointments without having to argue our case, that felt really restrictive. Um, Having to make sure we arrange medicines well in advance, because at the beginning of COVID, there was what we like to call the pharmacy chaos, where everybody, and looking at your
Yeah.
reaction, you well
Yeah. I
know
know
that,
exactly the same thing. Yeah.
yeah, everybody decided they needed all their medications for the next 3 months immediately. And so there were delays with medications, getting hold of them, having to find alternatives, having to work with doctors to get that sorted out. So it actually put a greater burden on carers. Um, and then I, one of the things I did was when supermarkets released their list of key workers, carers weren't on that list. So I argued with them on social media and wrote to them all and managed to get carers that extra hour where we could go to supermarkets in quiet times if we wanted to, or if we were able to be able to get carers in when it was easy and accessible and have priority shopping.
And that was the element that you had to look at as well, where you know, in order to be able to go shopping, you have to leave the people that you're caring for
Yep.
on their own for that period of time. Have you all managed to get your vaccines sorted?
Okay, so I've had my vaccines.
Right.
I've had my second one as well.
Okay.
Um, my husband, ironically, because he doesn't have a health condition that will affect him if he gets COVID,
Right.
has only just had his first vaccine.
Wow. Okay.
So we thought that was quite amusing that I had had both of mine before he even had his first. um,
Okay.
and the worst thing was, I reacted really badly to my first vaccine. I got the full on hit by a bus, completely useless for 24 hours side effect.
Well, mine was more a week with mine, but yeah, I
You
know.
were a week,
Yeah, it absolutely just completely knocked me out. But
floored you.
how was that effect? I mean, I guess in your role, you just still have to carry on.
Yeah, yeah. And previously, I mean, I had surgery for cancer, um, and I was discharged from the hospital because I made myself a pain in the backside 12 hours after my surgery. So there, I was had 197 stitches, and I had discharged myself. I was home and carrying on because I knew that I had to still perform my caring roles. I had minor surgery in December last year,
Yeah.
and I made that day surgery because I knew, especially with COVID, especially with the caring situation in Kent as it was, that somebody coming in to look after my husband was completely not going to happen. So, yeah, make sure that I'm in a position, even though I wasn't in the position and I was in absolute agony, that I had to be able to carry on. Because as carers, we have this awful habit, and we always do, of putting ourselves last. We're
Right down
last
the
on
list.
the list.
Yeah.
We're last on the list. And so, yeah, COVID was awful. It was frightening, absolutely terrifying. We had our hallway as an airlock, and if you came into our house, you were sprayed with Dettol spray, and you had to have gloves and mask and everything. It was literally nothing came into our house without being thoroughly cleaned.
Well, that was going to be my next question. I mean, did anyone in your household catch COVID? I mean, you know, we've spoken so far, and you're such an organised person. Did you already have a plan in your head that if, for example, you caught coronavirus, what would what would happen with the people that you care for?
The closest we came, well, we were very fortunate. My daughter, who lived in Canterbury at the time, last March, late March, early April, she had symptoms, but her PCR test came back negative.
Right.
But we still acted like she had COVID because we weren't sure that was a true negative test. Um, so she was treated like she had COVID. So I had to help her with shopping and that. So I was doing her shopping. I'm in Faversham, she's in Canterbury.
Right.
So I was running shopping to the outside of her house, pressing the bell and driving away. But the closest we came here is my son's school. He, in his bubble, there was a positive case, and he was sent home from school. So to go and get him, I erected plastic sheets in our car between the front and the back. Now, I know this sounds extreme, but I had to protect my husband.
You have to protect everyone that you're involved with, aren't you? Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
it. So there was a plastic sheet between the front and the back of our car. My son sat in the back wearing a mask, and I wore a mask. So even though the car was separate, he was still, forced to wear a mask. And I'd bought him one of those paper seats and put that on him before he got in the
Right.
car. I am not joking with this virus. He was brought into the house in that paper suit and put in his room.
Wow.
He did his self isolation in that room. He had disposable cutlery, plates, glasses, you name it.
Right.
And the food went to his door, and we knocked the door, left the upstairs landing, and then he was to pick up the food, and the rubbish went in a bag. That was put outside, and then I put it in another bag, and it was disposed of straight away. He tested negative completely, but I was not taking a chance for 2 weeks.
No, absolutely. So, I mean,
And so we were safe, but absolutely I was not taking a chance. The worst person to control during COVID was my mother-in-law.
right. As well as doing all this, and as I said a few minutes ago, you absolutely regimented organisation, precision, everything. But as well as doing all this, you also find time to help other carers as well. Can you enlighten us as to what you're actually doing at the moment as well?
Okay, so I'm part of the Mobilise community online. Now that's part of the community of carers for carers. So we support each other, and that's really important. And you get new carers come on all the time. They're sometimes not even aware they're carers, and a lot of them have been told they're a carer, but they don't know how to access support. They don't know how to access carers allowance or anything like that. It's really important to do that. Locally, I'm helping signpost now. Signposting is the most vital task. Making sure people do that first step of getting a carers assessment, because by getting that carers assessment, you open so many doors.
Yeah.
And at the moment, carers assessments are running so overwhelmed. Um, there's about a month or so waiting list to just get a carers assessment.
So the best
But
thing anyone can do is actually get one in place and
get
wait
one
for
in
it to happen.
place,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
But things like carers allowance, applying for that, and for older people, attendance allowance, because most people don't realise that for older people, attendance allowance takes over from carers allowance,
Mm.
and it's the older person that you're caring for that applies for attendance allowance, and it's little things like that, and for parents making sure that their children are getting the proper support in schools, and I'm just helping people making sure that they've got everything they need in place, because a lot of the time people seriously don't understand the support networks that are out there. So what I do is, I suppose with my 20 years experience, um, I'm very fortunate in the position that I'm able to say, no, actually, come on, we can get this, and this sorted for you, and take some of the pressure off their shoulders. And I have actually said to people, certainly when they're in that first stage of caring and they're overwhelmed, I will go and give them a break. I will say, look, I'll come in, go and have a couple of hours, go and have a cup of tea, go and have a walk, you know, and I will give people my phone number and say, look, it's okay, cry, just just cry. It's okay to cry, and if you can't cry to me, go and have a shower and cry in the shower, because you're allowed to cry,
Yeah.
you're allowed to feel overwhelmed. And I think that's such an important thing for people to know. You're allowed to feel angry, you're allowed to feel overwhelmed, and you're allowed to say, I don't know if I can do this.
You've mentioned there's a lot of support available, but here at Healthwatch, we've been trying to encourage what we know as hidden carers to come
Yeah.
forward and actually get that support that's available. Can you explain to as people who are watching this what we all mean by hidden carers?
Well, this is the problem. Hidden carers are people who are doing the job, and it is a job. Um, so people will step up, and we're incredibly good as a society. And we saw this during COVID. People stepping up as mutual aiders in their community or volunteering as Royal Voluntary Society people to look after those in their community.
Yeah.
We're incredibly good. People will just look after members of their family because it's what you do. um, but we have a tragedy in this country where we will do a huge amount and expect nothing in return. A lot of hidden carers are unfortunately young carers, and that's the real tragedy, where we've got children who are missing out on education, and we've got husbands and wives who are doing it because they took that vow, richer for poorer, better for worse, sickness and in health,
Yeah.
and they really feel it's a duty. And so hidden carers are the people who are doing it because they feel they should, but the problem is they're struggling alone, and with no recognition from doctors or consultants, and those people stepping up and saying, you know, you're a carer, don't you? And that would make life so much easier if these medical professionals would say those words out loud to people. It would really, really help. So
So
those people
what
are
would your
hidden.
message be then? What would your message be to any hidden carers who are watching this right now? What would you say to them?
Recognize your value, recognize what you're doing, and recognize your value, because you are hugely valuable, and the world couldn't cope without you, and that you are doing an amazing job. But there is so much help out there for you, and you're not alone. You're just not alone.
Turn the other way. Is there anything you'd like to say to the decision makers who may be watching as well?
Yes, stop leaving people alone. That it's your job to reach out. If you know there is a disabled person or a person who is regularly receiving medical care, then it's your job to actually get in touch and say, who's looking after you? Who's doing this job for you? And actually make sure that their carer isn't isolated and alone, because there's too many of them that are, and there's too many of them struggling, and there's so many people who do need just a bit of support, and I think that's vital.
Jenny, you do an amazing job. Just talking to you this afternoon, I've learned so much, and you just kind of get just a small snippet of what you've had to go through. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon
That's fine.
to mark Carers Week. The thing this year is to make caring visible and valued. And obviously we're lucky enough to hear from people every week who are carers, and we hear firsthand the amazing unpaid work that they do to look after their loved ones. So Jenny, once again, thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you for having me.